We are still waiting on students to join.
No, sir.
Okay, should we start then?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Architect Harbinder Singh Birdi ji, our guest speaker for today. HODs, AII coordinators, fellow faculties, architects of IA Jalandhar and Punjab chapter, and my dear budding architects, students. Welcome to the School of Architecture, Planning and Design, LPU Punjab. LPU School of Architecture has been ranked 6th, the best institute of India, and first in Punjab by Outlook iCare Rankings 2021. As far as the National Institutional Ranking Framework, NIRF, is concerned, our institution has bagged the 12th rank in India and the first rank in Punjab. This ranking obviously is adopted by the Ministry of Education, Government of India, to rank institutions of higher education in India. Very prestigious rankings. In an era of smart cities, sustainable buildings, and contemporary interiors, graduates of LSAD are groomed to become lateral thinkers by focusing on critical design approach. LSAD is emerging as a global center of excellence for learning, research, and engagement in architecture, design, and planning. Our main focus, obviously, is to provide a global attitude in students in a very local environment. Today, we have as expert among us architect Harbinder Singh Birdi from London, United Kingdom, partner Hawkins Brown Architects, London, United Kingdom. His talk today will touch upon the burning topic, that of designing for a post-COVID world. I hope we will all learn and he'll enlighten us with his vast global experience. Architect Harbinder Singh Birdi ji is a senior partner at Hawkins Brown, a London-based architectural design studio. He is a chartered architect and a member of the previous Architects Journal 40 Under 40 lists. He holds numerous fellowships, including the Royal Institute of British Architects and the Institution of Civil Engineers, for his expertise in design and delivery of major infrastructure projects. He is currently delivering architectural designs for 2 of UK's largest infrastructure projects: Thames Tideway, 3 new stations at Tottenham Court Road, Bond Street, and Liverpool Street for Crossrail 1, the Elizabeth Line. He also has delivered projects in the UK and other parts of the world, including India. Architect Harbinder ji is also a member of the Mayor of London's Infrastructure Advisory Panel and HS2 Independent Design Review Panel. He is a RIBA examiner and validation panel member. I, on behalf of LSAD, LPU, heartily welcome you, sir, and we are looking forward for an enlightening session with you. Welcome. Over to you, sir.
Welcome, sir.
Very much. Thank you very much, Atal. Okay, let me try and share my screen and hopefully this works. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Fantastic. So I just wanted to, I've got a short presentation. I really wanted to spend most of the time having a conversation with the students and the School of Architecture. So hopefully what we can really do is put on the cameras and actually have a conversation. And I wanted to start off, I was actually in my graduate year when I was 22, I came to work in Ludhiana, and I stayed with the architect Harbinder Singh in Ludhiana many years ago. And so in a way I wanted to sort of dedicate this talk to Harbinder, his wife Machachi, and their 3 children, Angad, Ruchi and Nidhi, who look after me so much, and he was my mentor from a very early age. So so this is really dedicated to the family that really sort of laid the foundations for my career. And so I wanted to start off by introducing ourselves. This is the practice. I mean, the projects that I'm going to show you, they were not designed by me. They were designed by my colleagues in the practice, and we're a practice of 300. And last year, we were voted by the Architects Journal in the UK as being the best practice in the country, and we've actually gained that award several times. So we are in the top 10 practices in the country, but we think of ourselves as being very diverse. And the talk that I wanted to do was really talking about this image here. You know, on the left is a picture of our London studio, which was in sort of January 2019. And then literally overnight in March, we had to do what was happening on the right, where all 300 of us had to go home and work, and yet we still had to sort of design and produce. And I wanted to talk about what were the implications of that, but also how our clients now and how we see the city being shaped based on us coming out of COVID. And in the UK now, we actually have come out of COVID in the sense that all the restrictions have been relaxed. The first thing was design. I mean, historically, we were all expected to come into the office, which was the place of design, and we would all have a desk. And actually, what we've realized now is that generally in the UK industry, in the creative industry now, you're expected to come into the office 2 to 3 days a week in the main. But 2 days a week are actually is yourself sort of situated at home. But what we're finding more and more is that in terms of design exchange, before we would have physical pin boards, but now what we have is the Miro pin board. So what we have is that we have this sort of like digital pin board that everybody can then display their material. And I think one of the interesting things is the authorship of that digital pin board, the quantity of the material, how you navigate through that digital pin board. And it is slightly different from the physical pin board. So I do think that one of the things that all designers are going to have to sort of maybe grapple with is how you bring the physical interaction of standing around a model to talk about to actually having a wider design team meeting where you've got this virtual pin board, the Miro, and how you navigate through that. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see as all industries around the world emerge. But what about the workplace? I mean, most of the cities, I think London, it's fair to say, out of all the city centres, was the most effective. And that is because people, I mean, on the average day in London, 4.4 million people will jump on the London Underground network, out of which most of them are actually coming into the town centre. And then that's suddenly overnight switched off. And actually what a lot of landlords, developer landlords, were saying was that, well, if we are going to create a place for people to come to work 2 to 3 days a week, those spaces have to be amazing. And this is a project that we're doing called the Printworks, which was an old printing press in East London. And what our developers now are saying is that we want to create places that will attract the best people, because what we have probably globally, it's fair to say, is in the pandemic, lots of people reviewed what it is that they wanted out of life. So there was something like 20% of people in the industry either left, they moved firms, they took time out. And so what a lot of businesses are doing as they're coming out of the pandemic is they have lost staff, but they're desperately seeking to find the best staff. And one way landlords and developers are addressing that is by saying, we'll create the most amazing working environment so that the best people want to come and work in your organization. And these are the sort of places, because now, if you have focused work to do, the chances are you'll do that at home. So the workplace now is essentially a space for you to exchange ideas. It's for you to meet people. So most of the time when you're in the workplace, what you should really be doing is having lots and lots of conversations with your colleagues and your clients. That's what you should be doing. And so what we're trying to do is create these environments. And I think everybody is still learning how they work. How much space do you give someone? Are there quiet zones? Yes. Are there spaces where you can interact? Yes. Are there spaces where you can have lunch? Yes. Are there spaces where you can relax? Yes. And how do you accommodate that all into one building program? So we see that being the future of the workplace. And cities, I think there's, as soon as in London in particular, a lot of people, they actually decided to leave London and move to the countryside. And they bought houses there because they thought with Wi-Fi, I can actually work now from home. What's happening now is that all those people are having to move back as they realize that actually the countryside and living in small villages isn't much fun. So what they're saying is that they really miss the city. And what we're finding is lots and lots of local authorities and councils and city mayors are looking to densify parts of the city, especially around transportation nodes. I mean, this is a proposal that we designed for a development above a major station in London, Clapham Junction. And what we're finding more and more is local authorities and developers and rail operators. I know that there's a huge program of rail infrastructure that's being proposed for India, because what they're looking at is density around the transportation node. And by doing that, what happens is that the air rights above the infrastructure, the public infrastructure, can then pay for the upgrade of the infrastructure. And also, it also means that you don't need a car. And I think at the moment, the big challenge for a lot of the major cities is to keep cities flowing, invest in major infrastructure, but the car is essentially on its way out. And so urban design is going to be key. This is one of the projects that we're currently delivering in London, in central London. This is the Thames Tideway Tunnel. The Thames Tideway Tunnel is a £4.5 billion new sewer network in central London. And this is a new piece of public realm that we're creating in the Thames, which connects the Bazalgette sewer, which is the old Victorian sewer that the engineer Bazalgette designed. Now, when he designed this sewer for London, it only had a population of 2 million, and that was 150 years ago. London now has a population of 8.5 million, and it's anticipated to grow to 11 million. But the sewage system can't accommodate that. So currently at the moment, the sewage, when it rains, actually goes into the River Thames. Something like every other day, raw sewage will go into the River Thames. And so this new project, which is a new sewer, is being designed. But I wanted to show this because it's about the public realm. So beneath that, this is a section. You can see on the image on the left, that's the underground line. And this is the area here that I'm showing you, which Bazalgette designed. And that was the old sewer that Bazalgette designed. And he actually created a small zone there for the utilities and the gas. And this is the new super sewer. It's a 7-meter diameter tunnel that will run all the way underneath from West London, where I live, all the way to East London. So all this sewage is going to be treated in East London. And it's situated beneath the River Thames. But we as architects, what we're doing is that we're creating these new public realms at the moment. And I think the public realm is really important because, 2 years ago, when we had our first lockdown, the only thing that we could do was go to the shop for food, and we were allowed a 60-minute walk. That's the only thing that we could actually do. And I think the public realm now is key. What we found was that people started walking more, cycling more, spending more time in the parks. So suddenly all the planners and the local authorities and all the councils and the city mayors realized the value of the public realm. And so what they're doing now slowly is making the roads smaller for the car, but greater for cycling and walking. And consequently, because of that, what we are doing is that we are cleaning our air as well. And I see with the electrification of buses and cars throughout the globe, what we will have is less cars on the road, but they won't be as polluting. But these are some of the public realms. I mean, that's the River Thames that you can sort of see. And we are sort of the architects for the design of the central section. And so you can see the different characters of those public realms along the River Thames. And that's because London was a Roman town over sort of like 2,000 years ago. And it slowly evolved. And all parts of it, as London has grown, it's a completely different character. And so even though it's a major engineering project, actually all people will really see is these new piazzas that we're creating in the Thames. So it's critical for London, really. But I wanted to major on this. This is a bridge that we're designing for Network Rail. Network Rail is the UK's rail operator. And what they wanted to do was design an innovative bridge that will allow you to cross the tracks. So this is like stairs and lifts that would cross the tracks. And I know that it's something that Indian Railways is looking at, because you haven't got safe crossings, and so many people die when they cross the tracks on the Indian network. And currently at the moment, the bridges that we're designing for Network Rail are all individual. So we were commissioned by Network Rail to design one typology of bridge that could be fabricated using component parts and literally repeated throughout the country. So it's almost like the sort of the Brompton or the Dyson of bridges. And it was 40% cheaper than the bridges that they were originally designing. But I wanted to show this picture here, which is all about collaboration, because in this room, you have the client from Network Rail, you have the engineers, you have the project managers, you have the architects, and you have, this is Chris Wise leaning on the right there. He's the engineer that actually designed the Millennium Bridge across the River Thames. So what we have here is that you have the fabricators and the contractors as well. So all parties are in the room right at the beginning. So it's genuine partnering collaboration where everybody understands the risk, the opportunity, the pain commercially. And so I think culturally, I see us going into this place a bit like the tech industry, where all parties are vested with the same sort of interest. And this was a picture showing a mock-up. What we tried to do was actually make the bridge using very small component parts that could be laser cut using any fabrication plant anywhere in the globe based on the design that we could export digitally. And this is the design of the bridge that we're currently trialing at the moment. We actually work with a specialist lift supplier who's actually designed a bespoke lift. And this is actually cut and made out of stainless steel. The reason why it's made out of stainless steel is, one, because it's very robust, but the maintenance of it is very, very low. And so the life cycle cost in terms of the embodied energy, in terms of renewal, is a lot shorter over a longer period of time. And this is something that I've been working on for the past decade, which is the new Crossrail line. So this is Tottenham Court Road Station. As a practice, we've been working on this project for the past 25 years, and it's been from design to construction. It's taken 12 years, and it'll be opening up in the next few months. So this picture here, if anybody's been to London, you're actually 26 meters below Oxford Street in central London. And the size of the infrastructure here, if anybody's been to London, when you jump on the underground, that platform is 100 meters long. These platforms are 240 meters long. So if anybody's been to Hong Kong to use the MTR, it's the scale of MTR, but it's been woven underneath London, connected to the existing network. Typically about 25 to 30 meters underneath London. But I wanted to really talk about this. This is the cladding, the platform cladding that you saw. We actually delivered that. We actually developed that with a contractor, a fabricator, and an engineer. And this was the original design that was given to us. The actual cladding panel was 25 mil thick of sand cement. And actually, by working with the specialist engineers and fabricators, we managed to reduce that to 12 mil. So it's a phenomenal amount of savings. So you can imagine that cladding there is across 6 stations. So what we managed to do was actually engineer and make the product a lot more. So I think I see us working less in silos, but more interdisciplinary in the future to benefit all parties. And this is laser scanning. So what we were doing is we were superimposing our BIM model with the existing fabric of the station. And I think what we're going to be able to do now in this sort of virtual world, which is this mixture of the digital, the virtual, the physical, is really start reducing abortive work, clashes, because I think we've now got the software which is being advanced at a huge rate to be able to minimize the amount of abortive work that the industry is in, which is a phenomenal amount of waste in the industry. London delivered the Olympic Games in 2012, which I always say is probably the best Olympic Games ever. But what we had a big at the time drive from the organizer to say that it would be the most sort of carbon neutral Olympic Games. And this building on the left, you can see that image on the right there, the big sort of sculpture that's designed by one of our most famous conceptual artists, Anish Kapoor. And it was sponsored by Mittal, actually. It's called the Mittal Tower. But the image on the left is the broadcasting centre. That was one of the largest buildings in the UK. And that was where the Olympic Games were filmed, was televised. So you had everything from BT Sport, all the big organisations, Sky, CNN, they were all in that building. And then after the Olympics finished, because it's only there for like a few weeks, 6 or 7 weeks, they said, what can we turn into? So a developer actually approached us and they said, we want to make this a new creative hub within East London. And so we kept the frame and we delivered this. So what we did is that we took the cladding off, which was a metal cladding, and then what we did is we put a glass skin on it. And what we really wanted to do was sort of animate it, almost dematerialize it in a way, just to give it more of a human scale. And you can probably see the fritting. Can you see the little white fritting diagonally? Well, if anybody's seen, that was inspired by the warships that Picasso painted in the Second World War to camouflage those warships. So we saw this this building almost like this huge structure, and one way of maybe dematerializing it was to use the same sort of artistic conceptual principles that Picasso used. But I wanted, and this is it in context, and you can see above is the Olympic Park. That's where all the that was the residential blocks that were designed for the athletes. And now people have moved in there. So what they had was they had this huge green lung, which is the Olympic Park. You've got the velodrome on the top left, and then you've got housing next to rail infrastructure, next to shopping. And here in Here East, what we have is basically a new place for businesses, academics, etc., to come together in what is still Hackney, a very young and vibrant part of London. And you've got the canal on the bottom. And interestingly, the Olympic, I didn't realize this, but the Olympic accommodation for the athletes it can only be 10 stories high. And the reason being is that if the lifts fail and you have to run to your race, 10 floors is the maximum number of floors you can descend without rupturing your Achilles tendon. That's why it's 10 stories everywhere in the globe, just in case the lifts break down. And what you need to do is run to the race for your event. But one of the things that I wanted to do was, we actually have a team of digital scripters. They're architects. They studied architecture, they design architecture, but I always say that they spent far too much time as children playing Minecraft. And they play Minecraft for us. And what they do now is that they actually, they write code. They write code that can develop component parts that can then be fabricated using CNC machines, and then they can assemble bespoke structures. And one of the things that we did do was this. So this is on the earthest facade of that building that I showed you. And this is the gantry. So the black grid there historically was an area where all the chillers and the fans that would ventilate the accommodation inside would be housed. We took them away. But at the time, Hackney had the highest concentration of artists, I think, in the whole of Europe. And because of the building of the Olympic Park, a lot of those studios were moved. So the developer here said, actually, we want to give those artists back the studios. And so what we did is that we used that scripting technology with the CNC cutting to actually design with them bespoke artist studios. And this image here, the one with the colorful stripes, that's because that's a famous suite that I grew up on when I was a kid in the UK called Refreshers. And the Refresher factory, which looks like the wrapper, the suite looks like the wrapper of that, was actually on the side. And so we pay this sort of homage to some of the industry that was there. But each one of these is bespoke, but it was made from the same language in terms of the fabrication and the design. We currently at the moment are, it's fair to say, are really sort of pushing ahead. I mean, Boris, our Prime Minister, is desperate to try and make the UK in particular, and to bring the rest of the EU and others on board to try and make us as environmentally friendly as possible. And I think everybody's seen the sort of the change in weather patterns, but I think what everybody's grappling with is what is the way forward. And as an industry, when I talk to engineers, I think something like 60% of all the carbon we use as a species is within the engineering and architecture world. Right? So if we can shave off just 10%, that makes a huge, huge difference. And one of the things that we are championing, one of the things that we've actually developed with a PhD student is HBIRT. And HBIRT is essentially a tool that measures the embodied carbon of all building materials. And this is Rahila, who started off with us as a graduate. She's an architect now. And she's very much our sort of sustainable environmental architect that is championing this piece of software that we're developing. And what we have to do now as an industry is look from cradle to grave. So what we're being asked to do is provide to the client when we're designing the material that we're specifying. Where does it come from? Is that a sustainable source? How is it then transported to site? How are we then assembling that material? What is its performance? And then when the building comes to its end, how do we then either reuse it or safely dispose of it? Yeah, so it's cradle to grave. And we're measuring all that now. And one of the things that we tend to do as a practice is that we say, if you need a new building and you've got a building there, can we at least try and save a bit of that building, right? And one of the things that we are doing is measuring the embodied energy that's within the existing building. So the image on the top left is a housing scheme. It's one of the largest social housing schemes in the whole of Europe, and it's in Sheffield in north of England. It's called Park Hill. And it's the largest listed structure in Europe. And what we did is that we converted that into new apartments. But one of the things that we did was that we kept the concrete frame. And generally, concrete is the one material that can go on and on and on. I mean, the Romans built in concrete, but actually it has a phenomenal amount of energy embodied in it. So can we save it? The middle image there was South Bank University is a student union. So we converted a car park into a new student union. And the image on the right is arguably one of probably the top 3 schools of architecture in the world. It's the Bartlett School of Architecture. So you can see the Bartlett School of Architecture looks like that image on the left. And what we did was that we kept the concrete frame, we took the skin off it, and then we made it bigger. And now it's the image on the right. But what we did is that by keeping the frame, we saved a lot of embodied energy. And this is a swimming pool that we designed for a girls' school. It's a Freeman school. And we used timber, laminated timber. And the good thing about using timber is that one, you have energy that's been captured by the tree. And what we've done then is that we've laminated that, we've taken that to site. And what we're doing is that we've designed it such that at the end of its life, what we can do is that we can reuse the timber. And that's a really big point when you use timber, is that always make sure that you have a life for it afterwards. Because if you burn it, the carbon goes back in the atmosphere. If you let it rot, the carbon goes back in the atmosphere. So what you really need to do is repurpose the material that you've got. But the beauty of this, and what the engineers really liked about it, was that by using timber, it's a light super frame. What that means is that the foundations, the concrete foundations, need to be smaller, which means there's less energy. And the image on the bottom left, that little grid that you can see, is basically the quantum of the embodied energy in the different materials within the swimming pool. And this is the project, this is the swimming pool being sort of like slowly erected, really light. We designed this sort of offsite digitally. It was cut and fabricated in Europe, shipped across. And it's only because in Norway they have an abundance of this species of larch, and then sort of delivered on site and erected very quickly. This is a school that we designed, and there used to be an old Victorian school on this site, and the local authority said, is there a way that what we can do is maybe get a new school but actually provide housing as well? And so a developer approached the local authority and said, I will give you a new school, build you a new school, if you allow me to build accommodation above. And what we did was that with the software that we've developed using Revit, our HBUT tool, all plugged together, as we were designing the building, we were able to quantify in real time the embodied carbon, not just for its construction, but also how much energy it would use for heating the building and lighting the building as well. So this is looking at the cost of, how much energy the building will consume over its 60 to 70 year lifetime. And so what we're finding more and more, I think, is maybe what communities in Hong Kong have done for a long time, which is this sort of layering of program from schools to office to housing, all into one dense development. And that's because of obviously a limited supply of land. Whereas here, what we're finding is that there's efficiencies to be made, especially when city centers are becoming more dense. And historically, 10 years ago, the thought of actually building a school underneath apartments in the UK would be unheard of. But now what's happening is that if the right partnerships can be brought together, they can be achieved. And this school, which is a state school, is the highest spec state school in the country, paid for in the main by the developer. This is our mess, Sadiq Khan. And Sadiq Khan, I think it's fair to say his legacy will be how he is making the air in London cleaner by making it very difficult for vehicles that are very polluting to actually enter the city. And that's a really good thing. It encourages people to buy cleaner vehicles. It encourages people to walk and to cycle and to use public transport. But this is him visiting one of our buildings, which is a social housing. So this is in the central London in Campton, and it's social housing, but it's designed to passive house standards. And we have I suppose in a way, the opposite challenges that you have in India. For us, the big challenge is to keep the heat in. And in India, it's to keep the heat out. And so what Passive House does is it's designing a structure which is, the building fabric is super insulated. But what we do is that the hot air that's generated internally, as we expel it out, it tempers the cold, fresh air that comes in to ventilate the homes. And so one of the ways of doing that, one of the ways that you need to test that is this image on the right, which is literally looking at how leaky the building is. So to design these buildings, especially in colder sort of climates, the build quality and the detailing that we provide as architects and monitoring of that construction on site is absolutely critical, because effectively what we're trying to do is restrict leaky buildings. But these are super insulated buildings that require the minimal amount of energy to actually heat. I'm just mindful that many of you are graduates. I mean, I used to be a trustee of a new school of architecture in London called the London School of Architecture. And I ran a small little unit comprised of these few students. And one of the things that we were looking at was the delivery model, the Amazon delivery model. So, pre-COVID, what was happening was that people would work 9 till 6 in the office, and whenever they wanted a delivery, they would have it delivered to the office because they would be there. And so what you found was that an endless amount of white vans driving into city centres, polluting city centres, dropping off parcels, and then you'd pick up the parcel, and then you'd go home on the tube or you'd cycle. And actually they were saying, well, actually this can't be sustained because we're filling up all the streets with these white vans because they're dropping off some headphones in a cardboard, but the white van has to drive along. This is insane. So what they suggested was that, is there a way that we can have these like delivery hubs that we could use the existing rail infrastructure? So what you would do is that you'd go home and then you'd come out of the underground or you'd go to your local shop, and that's where you would pick up your parcel. So essentially the distribution is a lot more local in your local area. So the city centre would be less polluted, less congested. And it's really strange how the world changed, because in March 2020, everybody stayed at home, but everybody had more deliveries than ever. So essentially what was happening now is that the deliveries had almost like reversed. They weren't going to the city centre anymore. They were actually going around the periphery of the city. So it'd be interesting to see how that delivery model works. And this is, I just wanted to talk about maybe like how some of our graduates in architecture now are learning, maybe in a hybrid way, which is they're working and they're studying at the same time. This is Praneeth, and Praneeth started as a young graduate at Hawkins Brown, and in her master's, she went to study at Sheffield University. And in Sheffield University, in your 4th year, you actually work in practice 4 days of the week. And 1 day a week, you're at university. And the project that she was working on was Thames Tideway Tunnel, because she was really fascinated about civic infrastructure. And finally, in the 5th year, she actually decided her final scheme was a piece of civic infrastructure in Sheffield. So what she had done is she had learned from practice, learned from a real project, learned from all the various architects and engineers and planners on the Thames Tideway Tunnel. And she had taken all that learning to university to shape her final thesis project. Then when she finished, we gave her a job back and she finished off Thames Tideway Tunnel. And she's actually standing there on site. Behind her, that little arch there, that's the arch that Bazalgette constructed over 150 years ago. And the little pipe you can see, that's the gas pipe that Bazalgette built 150 years ago. She's there on site. And now she's a qualified British architect, learning about this real project that she was actually delivering. So what we're finding more and more is students are working as they're studying. And this is Harbinder. Harbinder is an apprentice. She actually is going to be working with us for 3.5 years. This is Harbinder working on Liverpool Street Station for Crossrail. And so we pay her a full wage and we pay for her university fees for her to essentially go to university and work for us. So this is one way I think that students will be able to work and learn, still have the academic experience as well as the professional experience, but at the end of it, be qualified with no debt whatsoever. And the apprenticeship model, which historically in the Bazalgette era and the old sort of Victorian Georgian architects, that was how you would learn. You would be an apprentice. That's actually now very, very much back in the focus. And even Cambridge University has an apprentice course in architecture. But I wanted to then talk about maybe our role as architects in the industry, especially with the reliance so much on technology. When I talked about Here East, this is one of, in the Olympic Park, this is one of the residential blocks that we're currently designing as part of the big master plan in the Olympic Park. So this is looking at densifying and building more homes in the Olympic Park because of the housing need in London. So in the UK at the moment, we have a population of 70 million and we need 300,000 homes every year. In London alone, we need 50,000 homes a year. And one of the things that we wanted to do was maybe express the character of the area through the facade by colour. And I think the reason why I wanted to show this is that actually, I think one of the things that, and I'll probably be told off by a scripter from California, but I think colour is very subjective. And I do think that what you need is really architects and designers to be able to discuss, debate colour and its appropriateness. And so this is like a colour palette, a mood palette that we put together that looked at sort of like colours within the local environment. And then what we did is that we lifted some of those colours for us to be able to animate the facade. But it was done by people. So these are our architects and our designers who are actually looking at colour. But what we did is that we got our scripters who then create an algorithm that allowed the various colours to be almost painted onto the facade of the building based on the colours that we chose. And what we would do is work with the scripters to literally moderate and modulate where the colours might be. But essentially, the final decision of which colour it was done by people, right? So technology is great, but actually the narrative that is given from us as designers is probably more important than ever. And this is a building going up. So what we were using was off-site fabrication, all these components. So this was actually constructed by the contractor, the UK contractor Mace, who specialize in innovation in construction. So what we found, and you'll probably find this in most countries in the world, is there is a reduction in the number of people that want to actually work in the construction industry. So what we're finding now is that we have to automate that as there is a labor shortage. So in the UK in particular, what we are doing is looking at efficiency, waste, speed of construction, safety. All these things are being done in a cross-discipline, cross-industry-wide way. And then the last few slides were one of the collaborators that we always bring to our projects are artists. And these are pictures of artists that we as a practice have collaborated with over the past 15 years. And these are the buildings that we've designed when we've collaborated with those artists. And I think what is interesting now is the stories that we tell about our buildings and the various collaborators that we bring to tell those stories. And it's something that we find deeply rewarding across projects, across all of our sectors, simply because of the conversations that you have. And I'd urge, I know that in this School of Architecture, Lovely School of Architecture, it's part of an interdisciplinary School of Architecture. So I always urge graduates to actually talk to creatives who are not from the discipline that they're studying, because when you start practicing, that'll be very much part of the sort of ecosystem that enables you to deliver some of the buildings. And this was a project that we did, which was housing in central London. This was the Peabody Estate, and the Peabody have for over 100 years. What they've done is that they've always delivered housing, social housing, and we designed one of their developments in central London. But one of the things that we wanted to do was actually maybe tell a story that tell the story of the residents. And one way that we did that was actually creating workshops with the residents and working with an artist. And what they did was that we actually created these pieces of artwork on the facade of the residential homes. And here what we have is the clothes that the residents many years ago in the 1940s and the 50s they would have. So now we have an abundance of clothes that you could buy from various websites, and we don't know what to do with them. But actually, 50, 60 years ago, you'd have one sort of smart dress that you would wear to the weddings and the birthdays and to church, and you'd have one suit. But they would all be hung out lovingly and cleaned and maintained and stitched. And so what this was maybe telling a story about the thing that brought the community together, which was things like their clothes and just the simple things like drying your clothes and for you to sort of like share that whole experience. And so now that is sort of manifest onto the fabric of the building for the next 4 or 5 generations, again, telling that story. My last few slides is this. I mean, this is one of the entrances that we designed for the Crosswell station at Tottenham Court Road. And as you ascend up the escalator, we were asked to actually collaborate with artists. And so we did. We worked with 2 artists on this station, Richard Wright and Douglas Gordon. And this is a piece that was designed by Richard Wright, who's a Turner Prize winning artist. And Richard tends to work in situ. What does that mean? Well, what he does is that he works and applies his art onto the fabric of the building. So when he designed his piece for the Turner Prize, which is a famous London art prize, he painted this amazing, beautiful painting onto the gallery wall. Then after 3 months, when the exhibition finished, they tore down the whole artwork. But he was commissioned here to design a piece, which he painted using gold leaf, and that's Richard on the left. It took him and his team of 3 months. The design of the station is actually, we have to design the station, the concrete that he's applying that gold leaf to, which is how Leonardo applied gold leaf onto his sort of like structures of his beautiful like cathedrals and churches in Italy over 500 years ago. The lifespan of the station is 120 years. And I think what was interesting was Richard's take on how he sees people of the city using the station. And what he was saying, actually, one create an art that's so ephemeral. In London Underground network, where we're constantly rushing around, we wanted to create an art that will make you stop and pause. What I find really interesting going forward is seeing how our architecture shapes the way we move through this city, as we all now see the city differently. Thank you very much.
Wonderful presentation, sir. Himmat sir, follow with the question answer session.
Yes, it would be great to have any questions, and if you can put your cameras on, it would be great to see who you are. But it'd be great to.
Sir, one question that came to me is, I mean, you have shown diverse projects, right from the housing to large city centers or large spaces which are there in the cities. So one student asked me one question that if we are going to design a house, so how can we make it COVID free? I mean, post-COVID design, which should be followed in a simple house design.
I sense, it's a tricky one, because one of our graduates, she studied at the Manchester School of Architecture, and she actually did this very thing. She did a study which was the post-COVID city.
Yeah.
And what she did was that she used a whole raft of algorithms to look at the interaction that you would have with somebody else, the whole 2 meter distance, etc., the mask, etc. And she said, right, well, this is what the city would look like so that you don't get COVID as you move around. And then what she realized was that it wasn't very sustainable because there was no density. Because as soon as you use the lift shaft, well, how many lift shafts do you have? 4? At the moment we're building with 1 lift shaft and a staircase. You're going to have 4. Well, what does that mean? So what happens is that you can design something to segregate and to separate. But actually that will cost you, right? But it will cost you in terms of carbon, but also socially it will cost you, right? You know, there is some delight in sharing a public space with a stranger, right? If you stop that and you discourage that, what does that do? Like, you might not get COVID, but in 5 years' time, what will that do to your mental health? So I think the chances are we will probably have another pandemic, right? But I think all countries around the world and all health organizations around the world have learned a phenomenal amount. You know, if like for us, we look at Sweden, who didn't really have a lockdown, and everybody's going to be looking at the death rates to say, if you just carried on, what would happen? If you look at New Zealand, which is really strict, what is the death rate? Yeah, but also I think what people will look 5 years ahead and they go, all those cities, all those countries that lock down schools for 2 years, what is the IQ of the country in 5 years' time? I mean, that'd be interesting. Like, I always say, what did people do for 6 months when they weren't allowed to work? When they were staying at home, what did they do? I don't know. I don't know the answer, but it'd be interesting to see. I think my son is going to be 13, and I just think, you know, almost like, you know, for like a fifth of his life, he's been in this state. For me, it's been fine because I've lived this life where I've been interacting. If anything, I got to see my family a lot more. So for some people, it was a good thing, but for others, it's bad. And I do think that somebody needs to have that. In terms of the home, I think one of the questions, because it's a good question in the sense of, what is the home going to be like that you now need to work from home 2 days a week? And what we are finding is that what people will do now is that when they're looking for houses, they will say, I must have a 2-bedroom flat apartment. I can't have a 1-bedroom flat because one's going to be the study, or it's so big that I can divide it and I can segregate it and I can move it around. Because the reality is that historically, everybody had a 5-day contract to come into the workplace. That is being torn up. The organizations that will attract the best talent are the ones that say it's a 3-day in the office, 2 days out. Yeah, the best. And so what people will do, that they will say, I need to find accommodation that allows me to work 2 days a week, and my partner's working 2 days a week. Where do they work? And I've got children now. What happens then? So what we will see is this shaping of our accommodation that enables us to be able to work from home, regardless of our, I suppose in a way, our personal environment.
Yeah, one more question that came to me in my mind actually. Each and every material in the world, including, construction material particularly, and the rooms which we are living in, they are releasing volatile organic compound in some way or the other. Yeah. And actually we are sleeping during nights. So this we inhale, and this will create a lot of problem related to health and body and mind. So, I mean, can we create a kind of design which, bring down these kind of volatile organic compound while we are living, sleeping, or working?
If you think, it's a tricky one, because essentially what you really want, it's a bit like with COVID, right? What they said is keep the windows open. What you really want is ventilation. So what you really want to do is get as much ventilation as possible. And ultimately, you need to create materials that don't give off those toxins. Where do they exist? So somebody needs to do that. And because if it is seeping into us and having unknown effects 10, 20, 30 years down the line, and I suppose what we're hoping is that the construction industries are actually looking into that and they're being upfront about that. But I think we as an industry probably need to actually have people that are researching this and saying to the private sector, actually, that's not good enough. We've just like we're now, saying it has to be this compliant in terms of heating and ventilation. We might say it needs to have all these materials need to be banned. A bit like, look, when you buy, when you buy a chocolate bar, there's an ingredients at the back, right? And you look through it, and it's literally every single ingredient is there. If you've got an allergy, everything's there. It's almost like you probably need the same thing with building materials to say, well, these are the things that it can cause. But I'm just wondering, you probably need government organizations to be able to undertake that review. But the key thing, until that really happens, because around us all the time, everything from paint, etc., to like wood gives off toxins, but probably stuff that isn't as nasty as man-made stuff. But so everything does. The key thing is ventilation. I think in India it's less of a problem, because essentially what you really want to do, there's always ventilation in terms of cooling. Whereas in the colder climates, how do you temper that cold air coming in and ventilation out?
Actually, we are layering over layering and creating a lot of problem to our health.
Yeah,
just to get away from these kind of, during the heating, cool climate, we are making so many layers so that this, heat from inside should not be skipped away.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so that we should have some cozy
Sir, Sir and Tara ma'am also want to interact now.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. And again, sir, Neha Bansal, excuse me. Neha Bansal wants to ask some question. Please unmute her. Sorry.
Yeah.
Please carry on. Carry on, please.
I just want to add to it that, when we're talking about ventilation and when you're talking about Indian cities per se, that ventilation is, there only. But the point is now with the cities growing without much of planning and traffic congestion and, vehicles adding up, ventilation has become more of a hassle these days. So even if you talk about ventilation in India, you tend to get more pollutants, more dust into your home, which again is a question mark that, how much ventilation do you actually need? You actually need air to be circulating uninhibited without any obstructions, or do you want to set up a filter of plants, or let's say climbers, or some natural purifiers to actually curb at least major dust particles from getting inside your homes. So what do you think is
I totally agree. I mean, we have a challenge, and you're right. I remember when I was in Ludhiana 28 years ago, we were in the car going from the house to the office, and it was a 15-minute drive. And then I remember doing the same journey only 10 years ago, and it was an hour drive. So the sheer amount of congestion and pollution, and you're having to build in those areas, right? You're having to build. And so, but you make a really good point, because essentially, lots of, wall climbers, etc., all that organic plant material is fantastic at absorbing and capturing. But a bit like our cars, our cars have really sophisticated filtering systems. What they do is that they filter out the dust particulates, and what they do is that in the main, they're blocking out as much as they possibly can and giving the cleanest possible energy. And we are trying to do that on some of our buildings, especially when they're built next to railway stations or busy highways. It's like, how do you create this view, which is an amenity, but then also temper the air coming in? The challenge that we have is that when it's in the summers, if it's 35 outside, 35 centigrade outside, we don't really have air conditioning. So you open the window, it's 35 inside. So for us, it's a lot about aspect. But I think what we are going to have to do, I mean, what we're hoping, generally in the UK, there is a big move now to go away from diesel petrol cars to electric and cycling, etc. So for us, I see the problem really being particulates in the air, which is from brake dust and from the rubber particulates, right? So that's the big thing, I think, in the UK. But I think elsewhere, you make a really good point, as in you need to, you're almost sealing the envelope and just having small apertures that are cleaning the air. But what you still need to do is have that interaction with the outside.
And I'd just like to add to it. I mean, it's my own personal experience that we all remember the time then when there was a lockdown, almost repeatedly. People were totally sealed in their houses. And yes, they did have natural ventilation. And yes, you know, the number of pollutants had gone down because you do not have anybody coming from the outside in your house. So your house turned into this completely sterile environment. But still, there were cases, including mine, that were, you know, we reported itching or unnecessary irritation and, you know, rashes on the body. And when I spoke to my doctor on it, the whole thing that he pointed out was that you're living in a too sterile environment, and sometimes the same people living in the same environment can generate a lot of pollutants in the same air. Because you're not going out, you're not actually getting rid, you're not disposing of those pollutants. So yes, those diseases will come out eventually. Because, you know, they're going to be fungal issues. You're breathing the same air. You're not getting any air changes to your body per se. Then the other thing also came to my mind was that, yes, you know, there's a lot of thing going on air purifiers and smog, I don't know, smog chimneys set up for a whole city. But talking about the scientific aspect of all those things and what good they're actually doing to the cities or to the environment, there's a big question mark to it. This is my second point, that how can you address that? That how can you address ventilation with not getting any pollutants in?
I mean, I think the industries have to really take on a lot more responsibility to actually make sure they're not polluting the environment in the first place. And obviously with that takes investment. You know, that you've got to innovate, you've got to invest. It's like now, you know, in the UK now, I looked at my energy bill, right? And it has gone up. It came in yesterday, and I will pay £800 more a year, right, for my energy based on my usage. And 10 years ago, the amount of energy that was sourced, electrical energy that was sourced through wind turbines and photovoltaics, was 7% of the UK energy. Now it's 40%. And my electrical tariff has gone up by 100%, because that is the investment that I have to pay for more renewable energy that I will benefit from in cheaper energy in 10 years' time. Right? So someone has to pay for it. Right? Someone has to pay for all that. And essentially, in the UK, it's the taxpayer. Now, I can afford an extra £800. A lot of other people can't. So they are now saying, they have heat poverty. They're saying, well, £800, that's my food. So what they're having to do is really think about either heating their homes or eating. Yeah. So that, and now obviously, you know, we have this, you know, Russia is invading Ukraine and we get our gas from there. In the UK, we don't really like nuclear power stations. France loves nuclear power stations. We buy our electricity from France. It's because we've not built any nuclear power stations for the past 20 years. But I think there was a stat where, you know, only 1% of the global energy is from renewable energy. Only 1%. That's tiny.
Yes, absolutely. So, you know, innovations might, you know, be the answer then. Definitely. Yes. Thank you for your answer.
I think we had another question from Neha, if I'm right. Nagendraji?
Ma'am is unable to join.
You have to unmute her, I think.
No, sir. Some problem
Okay.
from her side,
Okay.
I think.
Any students want to ask some questions?
Yeah, Neha
Yeah,
ma'am.
Neha is saying,
You have unmute me. Okay. Neha ma'am, can you drop the question, please?
or she can type the question. Yeah,
You can drop the question in chat box. Sanjay sir also joined, sir.
Sir.
Good afternoon, sir. Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, sir.
Harbinder sir, Architect Sanjay Goyal, sir. Architect Sanjay Goyal, sir, is the chairman of IIA Punjab chapter, Indian Institute of Architect Punjab chapter. And only one architect in India be appointed as a director of a smart city, Ludhiana.
So although I attended for a few minutes in between, but my congratulations to Speaker Harbinder Singh Birdi, sir. So it was wonderful, sir, and probably I would like to listen you again in the coming times. And thank you very much. And I read about your profile. It's wonderful, and a lot of knowledge has been given to so many people. And my best wishes to Harbinder Singh Birdi, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Nagendra sir, I think Neha wants to interact. Can you unmute her or?
There is some
Okay,
problem
there's some
from ma'am's
problem.
side.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
okay. So any other questions from any students?
He has asked one question.
Okay.
Yeah, drop.
Yeah, Neha madam's question there on the chat box. How do you look forward to urban planning and resilience with respect to pandemic, which is temporary?
She is professor at SRM University, Chennai.
I see. I think it's a tricky one because I think the next pandemic, no one quite knows how it's going to affect us or how severe it will be. But it could be in 4 years' time, it could be in 60 years' time, but the chances are it will happen. And I think, if you look at the things that we took for granted, we always took the shops, the deliveries, the health network, the people that drive our trains and the buses, like all that was taken for granted. And then suddenly lockdown came, and the only people that were actually working were all those people that were getting goods to us. And without that, where would we have been? So I think density will continue. And the only reason is that I think as a species, what we really want to do is live in communities and interact with each other. So I don't really buy this thing. And I've got friends that have done it where they've moved out to a small house in the country, and all they could see apart from their wife and child was 2 horses. And after 3 months, they were really bored. They were really depressed. And so I think, when cities have a concentration, they're very efficient. But also what happens is that you have lots of people coming together where they can share ideas and create new things. So I'm nervous about asking cities to disperse and have more space because of a pandemic. I think what we should do is work on the basis that what is the best for the non-pandemic situation, and then when a pandemic comes, how do we use various levers, whether it's protection, lockdown, washing your hands, working from home, to almost like combat the pandemic. Because what people ever is saying is that, you know, the first vaccine, public vaccine, was given in my hometown in the Midlands, in Coventry, a year and a half ago. And what people are saying is that, imagine if the vaccine wasn't invented, what would happen now? What would happen? You know, what would we do if there's no vaccine invented? And we couldn't. But I do think what is happening more and more is people's appreciation of their homes and of the public realm and of their local. So before, everybody would rush into the city where they would work, and they would spend their time and money there. And then at the weekends, they would be in their local area. Whereas now what people are doing is that they are now working from their local area part-time. So their money is being spent in that local area. So when I go to the cafe every morning, after I've dropped my son off at school, and I have a coffee and I get my computer out and I look around me, and 80% of the people in there are doing exactly the same as me. They're actually just working. That's their office. They'll do that for 2-3 hours and then they'll go home. So I see there being this shift where the city centre has to change the way. I mean, look, in London in particular, which is, it's fair to say, has really, really suffered. What London is now is trying to say is, when you come into the office, you will meet people, and then in the evening you will meet your friends or go to the theatre or do something recreationally. So you'll have 2-3 days where you're really busy and engaged, and then other days you're at home and you're working. So it's trying to reinvent itself to enable that to happen.
Yeah,
but, you know,
I think they have unmuted me, and
right,
I could connect you. Thank you. I could connect you. So I would just ask a question.
Switch on your video. Yes.
Yeah. A very warm evening to you from my end. And I'm Dr. Neha Bansal. I'm professor with SRM University, and I'm basically a city planner. Right. And a disaster manager by PhD. So we do a lot of research. I have some scholars who are working on these aspects of city planning, and since since pandemic is a very recent event, so it does affect every aspect of life, including the planning. And we are talking about planning. Now, planning, what happens is, when we talk about resilience and looking forward to architecture as well as urban planning, they are long term. And we at this point are not very sure as to how long this pandemic would go and which direction it will take, because as the pandemic is progressing, especially when we talk about COVID, it is progressing. Every variant of COVID is different, and it needs a different set of protocols as resilience or as a coping capacity. So the bigger question for urban planning community at this point, or maybe for architects also, is how to deal with this temporary arrangement. Sure. And since I'm a PhD in disaster management, urban disaster management, so a lot of questions when I give webinars is that how do we look forward to disaster management with respect to this particular pandemic, which itself is a disaster, but then it is against the nature of the other type of disasters which need a different type of resilient planning in urban places. And also to the fact that when we talk about the smart cities, which is now the key of development, even if we look forward to, we are trying to go for something, which is more compact, more dense, more high. And that is how the cities are planned these days. So it's really a very difficult question to answer, as well as to go ahead with the planning community.
I totally agree. And this graduate that I was talking about, she literally did that study using a whole raft of scripting, etc. And she says it doesn't work. She goes, if you want something that's dense and sustainable, you can't deal with the pandemic. It just doesn't work. They're conflicted.
Truly, but then this is a temporary situation. When we look forward, or we look ahead, another 10 years, this pandemic might not exist. then the structure or the system becomes obsolete, and then the development is not actually aligning with the one single event. Is what is the bigger concern of the community of us planning and architectural community.
And I think you're right, because I think how do we as architects and urbanists and designers create environments that people generally want to live in? So imagine there's another lockdown in a year, but you're in a flat that is, an apartment that's so small with a window that looks onto somebody else's toilet and there's no ventilation, but you can't leave. It's just not a great place. So I think what we need to do, and I think the market reacts, because when I look at the apartments or the houses that people are buying that have the highest value, it's the ones where people say, I'm going to be working at home for 2 days a week, so I need a place that I am happy in for 2 days a week. So suddenly that creates a premium. Like all the houses, what people are doing in London now is that rather than living in a small apartment in the center, they say, I will buy a house further out because it has a garden. It has an outdoor space. And I think we should be designing more and more buildings where you have the amenity, the outdoor spaces, good light, good ventilation, good connections to, the local amenities like shops and parks, etc. So you can live quite happily in this almost small, well-designed, dense village, rather than relying on the major city centers, because you've still got to get there. And if you don't have in London, we're blessed with an amazing transport network. We are spoiled, right? We are spoiled. It's just and so we are hyper connected. But the one place that nobody wanted to go on to in lockdown was the underground, right? Because you're confined.
Yeah, but I would, I'm sorry, I would differ a little bit in this with you. In my opinion, development is never a disadvantage or the, the positive aspects of urbanization. It is up to us how we are actually adapting, because I do agree that another lockdown, if we look forward to another lockdown and we are stuck up in a situation where we have smaller spaces, but then if we look in the longer run, what if if another pandemic or maybe, there was a flu which was there in 1980s or probably 1800 something, there was a flu in Switzerland. And that flu, the norms that time which were needed, people were to be moved out of the houses rather than moving in. The protocol which was demanded by the pandemic at that time was different. So it's a concern, sir, because when we go with with different forums, it's still a concern how to deal with the pandemic situation and the planning aspects of cities. To some extent, we can have spaces which are designed with more light and ventilation. Of course, light and ventilation is always energy conservation, and we do go for net zero buildings and things which are more green in nature. But at the same time, we do have to look forward into the development, that we cannot move back into the era where we had more of open spaces. It is, or rather, I would put it in a different way. When we design smart cities, we focus on infrastructure. I probably read your profile. I could not go through your entire presentation because Nagendra ji had sent me a link very shortly. So I could go through a little bit of your presentation, as well as I saw that you are involved in the infrastructure aspects in your firm. You are a part of infrastructure planning. So it is through the robust infrastructure that we create smaller and compact spaces and more open spaces, which probably is the need of the hour in terms of the land deficiency, the other issues, the climate change, the environmental impacts. All these also somewhere play a role, just not the biological disasters. So biological disasters are very short term. So it's still a concern, and whenever we go into such discussions and into forums like this, that ambiguity is always there. The only solution
Right, Neha. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the feedback that you've shared. It's wonderful to hear from you.
Yes.
Any other questions from any other students? If any other student wants to ask something.
Sir, one student sent me a WhatsApp that in case of
Go
public
through the
place
question.
building- Yeah. One student sent me a WhatsApp. He wanted to ask one question, that in case of public places like shopping mall or public library, so a lot of people are interacting together. So what kind of design alteration or design transformation that could be done so that the pandemic or the COVID could be mitigated in those areas?
I think with shopping, I think what we found is that you actually don't probably need to shop. I mean, everybody gets everything online and delivered. You know, I think now the shopping centres and the high streets, they're trying to draw people in. And what they're trying to do now is that they're saying that actually you very rarely buy things from the shops, but you actually go there for an experience with your friends. So what you'll do is you'll go for lunch, or you'll go for a coffee, then you'll look at some of these things. And actually, you know, all the retailers now in the UK, a lot of them are saying, we are going to create an experience for you when you're in the shop, such that you have to buy the things from here. And so what they have is a shop front, but what they've got is an online business. But the reality is, I think, is that it's very difficult, I think, to shape a retail offer for the pandemic, because what people would say is that you have to put a mask on, you have to, you know, make sure that your hands are clean, etc. That's going to be the sort of like preventative measure when you walk into retail. But if you really want something, you'll order it online and it'll be delivered. So I think with retail, all of our town centres now, they are saying, well, what sort of retail is sustainable? And it's really a complementary of, you know, you've got the library, you've got the town hall, you've got some restaurants and coffee shops, you've got places to work, you've got some small boutique shops, you've got gallery and culture. So what you're trying to do is get people to interact, which as a species is something that we can't help, right? You can't survive off being in your room and doing everything online. You have to come together.
Absolutely right. Absolutely.
So I think we won't take any more time from Architect Harbinder ji.
We've got one more question.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, we have. Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Jasmeet.
Jasmeet, you want to some? Yeah, Jasmeet is our second year student, sir. Yes, Jasmeet.
Yes, sir. Sir, you have given a wonderful presentation. Like, you have touched on many points, like which are new for me. And sir, I have a question in my mind. Like, sir, how can we create spaces which can improve human health and which can increase the cognitive ability, like mental thinking of human beings? Like if we are having some office spaces where people will work there, so how can we design like the people which are working there, they can it can help them in increasing their ideology, and they can work better way, like it will
Yeah. I think the way to do that is to actually create an environment or an office space that has lots of different sorts of spaces in it. So we are all different. So essentially, if you think about, there's a big thing in the UK about a year ago where they were talking about the temperature of the office, which is set at 21 centigrade. And I read somewhere that 21 centigrade temperature was based on from the 1960s, where it was based on an English gentleman sitting in an office wearing a three-piece woolen suit. Right. So, but actually in the office, what you've got is you've got people that actually sometimes get really hot Some people, they need to wrap up well. Some people like to sit by the window. Some people like to sit. So there's this thing about the open plan office where everybody used to say the open plan office is really, really efficient because it makes lots of conversation. If you go into most open plan offices, everybody's got their headphones on because people are being distracted, right? So actually, I think the key one is really to create a number of different spaces with lots of different character that allow people, and we are all different, to be able to find those spaces. And sometimes you want a quiet space. Sometimes you just want to sit down on something comfortable and look out the window at a tree because you're dreaming, right? Sometimes you need a space where there's lots of people in the same room and there's lots of stuff on the wall. Yeah. So I would create, and this is, that image that I showed you, that the office building I've been designing, it just has lots of different spaces in it. I mean, Hermann Hertzberger did that, which was creating spaces for different sorts of character traits and different working patterns. And I think what you're finding now is that there are times when people are at home because they want to do that sort of work. And there are people, and then they come into the work. And the developers that we're working with now are creating different zones. Yeah, but even things like the circulation space, how you design the circulation space so that it enables you to interact when you're moving through it. There are actually spaces there that will allow you to stop and pause and allow other people to move through it. So there's fast spaces, there's slow spaces, there's quiet spaces, there's hectic spaces, there's dreamy spaces. Most of the ideas that you'll get is when you're actually in a landscape, when you're on a train or a plane, away from all tech. That's when all the ideas that are in your head, they somehow sort of filter in. So maybe you need to create a place which has got an amazing roof terrace where you can actually get away from it all. So that's what I would do.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Great, sir. Great, sir.
Thank you, Jasmeet.
Thank you, sir. Thanks.
Okay. I hope we haven't taken too much of your time, Harbinder ji, because I think the students and the faculty are really excited to interact with you, and I can see why. I think what you have done very nicely today is you've juggled and you've somehow their memories and their thought process, and you've got them thinking about things. And not only questioning things, you're asking them to reevaluate things, which I think is the whole purpose of this discourse. And it's wonderful to see that, the kind of questions and the kind of ideas that you floated. And, that is the main purpose, I think, even in COVID times, to question things and to maybe, to see what are the different perspectives or different ways in which problems or issues could be addressed, whether in a UK context or an Indian context. So that's I think a wonderful session from you, beautiful presentation, and the way you articulated the thoughts, and you've got the thought process from the others, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for a very engaging session. Thank you so much. Wonderful.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Nagrenda, as well. Thanks for organizing this talk, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. And look forward to seeing you all again. Next time I'm in Punjab, it'd be great to
definitely
to visit the university.
Definitely.
Yeah, sir.
It'll be wonderful to have you in presence at LPU. It'll be wonderful to have you, and I think soon we will have you at LPU with all the students, with all the faculty members in our auditorium. I think we are coming to that shortly.
Fantastic.
Sure, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you very much, and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Cheers.